You're listening to Graphic Novel Explorers Club podcast, an audiobook club.
Thanks for checking out today's episode of Graphic Novel Explorers Club. I'm one of your hosts, Dennis, joined by
Johnny Flores
and
Francis Preziosi.
We hope you've already read today's title because all three of us have read the book and we will be discussing it. So beware, spoilers ahead. We would love for you to share your opinion and thoughts on our social media. Our Twitter is @GNExplorersClub. You can find us on Facebook or email us at gnexplorersclub@gmail.com. Graphic Novel Explorers Club is available on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever podcasts are available.
Today we're going to be discussing My Favorite Thing is Monsters. This is a book that Dennis picked out, and I think we both had Johnny and I had some reservations about this book.
I did?
Yes. It's
$40.
$40.
That was the hesitation. I didn't know it was that price until you sent a message to the three of us to us.
Exactly. One of the hesitations I had was just looking at a couple pages. It just didn't seem like it had a lot of content.
Like more drawing.
More drawings, just maybe like 2 or 3 words. So I thought it was going to be a bust. I was extremely wrong.
And the author and illustrator is Emil Ferris.
Yes, right. And we're going to talk about her in a little bit. Mm-hmm. So basically, because of how big this book is, I'm going to give a quick recap, and then we can go in depth into some of our favorite things.
It's over 400 pages, warning.
Yes, yeah. So basically, this follows... what's the character's name? I'm already behind.
Karen.
It is Karen. Thank you.
Karen Reyes.
Yeah. It follows Karen Reyes in the 60s, growing up in a Chicago area. Not the suburbs, but more...
Like in the city proper.
Yeah. We're talking probably about, given some of the historical notes, like MLK being shot, it's probably like 1968.
I think you're right. I think that's when it was.
Yeah, that's what I took it. Well, the each new quote-unquote cover, it has the year on it.
Oh.
Didn't notice that.
Yeah. I didn't notice that, and I finished the book.
Well, when you just flip through the pages, you just...
when you're trying to read it for content and not just staring at the covers.
This graphic novel...
How dare you, both of you. I read it. That's why I read it more in depth than the both of you.
No.
That's why I couldn't finish it.
So, this is an autobiographical recount, I believe. This is a girl, Karen, who lives with her mother and her brother in a basement apartment, and that's going to be important later.
And the brother is Deezy.
Yeah.
That's his name.
Well, just to clarify, it's not autobiographical of the author. You're just meaning recount in terms of...
It's not?
It's like semi-autobiographical. I don't think
She grew up around that same time in Chicago. She was obsessed with monsters. I don't think she experienced...
Oh, okay. That actually clears up a lot. So, sorry, let me finish with the recap real quick, because these two are trying to mansplain.
Not trying, I am.
Yeah. So, thank you, though. That's really important. It's not autobiographical. There's one of her, not roommates, tenants in this building.
Neighbors.
Yeah, they commit suicide, but they actually believe that this person was murdered. So it follows this little girl growing up in a very turbulent area of the 60s. And I think it's important to note that being non-Caucasian, some of the obstacles she faces. And
her brother, too.
Yeah.
Because they're Hispanic.
And what did you say? What was it? The neighbor that was murdered is somebody who survived the concentration camp. Anka, yes. So it's a really... Let's get into the art first, maybe, and the story. So the whole thing
they're so
is done.
intertwined. It's not like like in most graphic novels, the text almost, or like the caption bubble, almost kind of is separate from the art. I feel like they just like, here's where we can fit the bubble in, and this is. I guess part of the art of this is it looks like a bunch of journals, like spiral bound.
It's done on lined paper. And another really great thing that this artist does is, as she's telling the story, she does these little sidebar narratives about like, oh, my brother kept his room so dirty, so I would always hide in this pile of clothes on his chair.
Or there's a thing where the girls that pick on her all wear pink, and she says, that's because of Bob or some musician. They do this, and I was like, what? I don't like. I was born after her, but still grew up kind of when she was a kid. So I was like, what's that reference to? But it's very. This was like a.
I left out an important part too.
she made it seem almost like it's free association, but it's not. You could tell this is carefully plotted, but it feels like it's free association because things are just like piecemealed into the page.
It's how you would imagine. The artwork is way above what a 10-year-old would actually draw,
Yeah.
but the content and how a school kid would draw in their notebook.
I'm doing this, and then all of a sudden I thought of this, so I'm going to draw this over here real quick.
Exactly. And just
or things are written sideways when the picture's
I forgot this part, so I'm just going to write this little note.
Yeah.
Right. There's some text that is completely vertical and just little sidebars. Some of the artwork is well drawn, while others are just quick scribbles and drafts almost. It's amazing. The artwork is, at first I thought it was going to be off-putting, but actually was extremely engrossing. And like Johnny said, it's integral to the plot of the story and how the story is told through the voice of this 10-year-old Karen Reyes. And you feel like you're reading her actual
diary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So another really important part, I'm not trying to womansplain now, but I will, that I left out was the little girl Karen has drawn herself throughout the story as a werewolf. She is a monster in this book, and it will come to light later on why she thinks she's a monster, which is a really, I don't know if you got that far.
Nope.
Okay, well, we'll explain it to you.
Right. Her reveal, slight spoiler, is a lot better than that stupid vampire from
Twilight?
Preacher.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Where he finally takes his glasses off. That was kind of a moment like that in this book, which I found much more powerful.
The author, she has an MFA in fine arts, and you can tell because she references way more art than.
Oh, she goes like
They go to the museum.
Yeah, but not just like verbally. There's a lot of references to famous paintings that are scattered. She'll illustrate things.
She'll actually recreate in some ways the paintings themselves.
But as it affects, like as she sees herself or her family or other characters.
Don't try to make up that you didn't finish the book, Johnny. Stop. But, so this is an important thing, I think, that you guys are both hitting on. In the story, one of her escapes during this turbulent time is her brother takes her to the museum quite a bit because he loves to draw, and he's the one who shows her how to draw. And there's a whole section about block letters, and this is the 60s before computers and fonts and the artwork that's there. And you're right, she does reference certain photos and with the meaning behind it. And she even sees herself like the photo calling to her and her almost like getting into the photo. And she actually gets kicked out of the museum when she's really young because she touched one of the pieces of art.
In her head, she was in the painting.
Yeah.
And she split the painting, which is a real thing. You can, when you're illustrating or painting or whatever, you have a couple options on how you're going to break the page up. You can cut it up into thirds, or you make a triangle that pulls your eye. You constantly want the eye moving around in your drawing or your painting or whatever. And then the painting, it's the Red Dragon took inspiration. The tattoo, that novel
Hannibal.
movie. Yeah, the Red Dragon took inspiration from that drawing, that painting that she's referencing, where a knight's killing a dragon, but it looks like just a monster.
Well, I like her perspective too when she's looking at famous paintings. I felt the same way when I was a kid. Like the one I don't remember the context of it, but it was Mary Magdalene, and she's holding a skull, and that's supposed to represent where Jesus is buried because the mountain area looks like a skull, and so she was talking about how creepy it was that this lady has a skull in her lap, and
But
she's seeing it through the eyes of someone who like really likes horror comics and books.
But
and such.
but in that painting, she breaks down the three parts of her brother. There's the noble part of him that protects her and her mom. There's the dragon, which is his monster self, like the side of him that gets kind of ugly, and then the princess in the background. I forget which part of that painting is him. But yeah, it was, I don't know. There's so much.
Well, let's get off the
detail in
painting
this book.
for just 1 second. So,
Nope.
yeah, so Karen, the girl Karen, she has this really good friend, Missy. Her and Missy are BFFs. They go to each other's house every weekend.
Butt fucking friends.
Oh my God, you did not just say
Dude,
that.
it was an It's a beautiful relationship.
I know. And they're 10-year-olds.
That's what I think of whenever I hear BFF. I don't think best friends forever.
So anyway.
That's only when we use BFF, Johnny.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's right. Sorry.
When they stay over at each other's house, they stay up really, really late, and they watch the monster horror show. Is it the Creep Show? Is that what it's called?
They watch something.
I forget the exact name, but usually at that time period, there was always something. I stayed up for those kind of shows.
Well, and back then there was like regional television that you'd always have like Kooky Ed and his monster.
Right, exactly. He'd host it, and he'd sit on a chair, and he'd introduce some Vincent Price film.
We had one here in Sacramento back in the early 80s.
Yeah, so they watch these shows, and I'm just going to keep it moving. I'm sorry. I'm going to just break this down. Like, I'm not trying to be rude, but the Caucasian mom finds out that they're watching all these monster shows, Missy's mom, and she really doesn't like it. And she thinks that...
she's very waspy.
Yeah, she calls Karen's mom to be like, do you know your daughters are doing this? And she's like, oh, it's not that harmful. But, and she's like, well, like, of course you would think that because, like, your kind doesn't really care what their children watch.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, I'm going to add to that a little bit. The reason, though, that she freaks out a little bit, though, is because Karen has a crush on Missy and tells her in her sleep, I love you or something like that. And then Missy says it back to her. And then she takes it as like, oh, like we could be.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
And then Missy asks, do you think the bride of Dracula can have a bride? Like, like can they be girlfriends kind of? And then she asks the mom that. And then I think that's when the mom kind of freaks out a little bit. And that's when she calls Karen's mom.
Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah, it wasn't just because of what they were watching. I think is because they were starting to have feelings towards each other.
Yeah. Well, I think one's having feelings for one and the other's just a friend. So, but the mom was like, yeah, it's no big deal, Karen's mom. So the mom, Missy's mom, cut it off. She's like, you can't be friends anymore. And so Missy, when Karen goes to school, she really doesn't have any friends anymore. Everyone kind of sees her as this freak. It's not clear if it's because she's Hispanic or if it's because she's slightly different. At one point, like, Missy and her friends kind of taunt Karen. And then as the girls walk off, Missy, like, mouths to Karen, like, sorry. Like, I'm sorry. Like, she really doesn't want to not be friends with her, but she has no choice. So Karen, she finds solitude in her neighbor, Anka. And she's very, very sweet to her. Anka loves these flowers and, like, is showing Karen how to care for certain flowers. And then one day, like, Karen goes to school, and I'm sorry, I missed an important part. Every time Karen goes to school, Anka gives her bread, and she makes her hide it, and she does it very quickly, and it's this rye bread, and she's like,
with nuts in it. That
yes.
was like a,
oh my, like, that's not an important part. That's really not.
I'm listening, Francis.
So you didn't even finish the book. Like, stop trying to make it like you're so.
I just want to be part of the conversation.
Yeah. It had nuts. Okay. But so
I'm just gonna go back in my house.
No, I'm sorry. So at this point, Karen does know, and the readers know that Anka was from the concentration camp, and she seems to be having like some flashbacks or something, or definitely some residual
or PTSD.
Yeah, I think from that. So every morning she gives Karen the bread, and Karen like leaves the apartment building, and she kind of waves to Anka in the window, and she comes home from school one day, and the police are there. Her mama takes her to the diner. They're waiting for Deez. Is that his name?
Yeah, that's his nickname.
And mom tells her like, oh, like she was murdered. I'm sorry, she was found dead. So, and they believe it was suicide. As Deez comes into the restaurant, Karen gets really quiet and acts like she's drawing, so that way mom and Deez will talk, because she's kind of learned this. I think we all kind of learned that as a kid.
Yeah.
Like, she's always kind of eavesdropping.
Yeah, just disappear into the shadows. And
yeah.
The parents will.
And so it's revealed that as the mom's talking to Deez, Anka was shot in the head. Was she
chest.
shot? Thank you, chest.
Shot in the heart.
Shot in the heart. However, her door was deadlocked from the inside. So there's no way anybody could have broken in.
But she was shot in the living room and somehow made it to her bed.
That's right.
And made the bed up around her.
And I think her cat had her blood on it.
Yeah,
and maybe the cat was stuck in the closet. So how did that happen?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So there's like some questions about some of the details.
Yeah. And so now you guys can interject whenever you want and help me with this. Karen decides that she's going to like investigate and solve Anka's murder. Anka has a husband. I don't remember his name. I'll just call him husband.
Well, he's referred to as Mr. Silverberg because that was
right.
her.
Yeah,
Mr. S.
Mr. S. And
well, there's a lot of suspicious things. Deasy gets questioned by the police. Mr. Silverberg gets questioned by the police, and his alibi was he was out of town. He's a musician. He's a jazz drummer, and that he was out of town performing. But then his story, it's not true. The police, somehow she finds out that like that wasn't necessarily true. He was in town. Deasy gets questioned, and then the downstairs neighbor who has a glass eye and is a ventriloquist is also questioned too about what happened.
And what you'll discover later on in the book too is this apartment complex is kind of like owned and operated by like a gangster. And so there's some shady characters living here. It's not...
Including his wife.
Yeah. It's not like...
Oh, Anka?
No. The woman upstairs. I forget her name, but she's always trying to get Dees to sleep with her. But that comes out later in the story. So... If
you read it.
Yeah. So at one... You're going to have to help me with this part, Dennis. Well, maybe Johnny can. I don't know. But at some point... Anka's husband is like really, really sad, and he invites Karen to his apartment. Somehow Karen gets into his apartment, but she's invited there. Like she doesn't break in. And
I think he sees her on the street.
I think,
and he's like,
and he knows that Anka has always been kind to
and nurturing to
Karen.
Karen.
And it's also, I think he also kind of knows that maybe she wasn't always faithful. That comes up too. But so he invites Karen in, and somehow he starts getting like drunk, and he's like so sad about what's happened to her in the life that she's had, and he's like, oh, I have these tapes. She was interviewed for a story by somebody, and she recounts her life during the concentration camp. So he starts playing the tapes, and
I'm not sure if it was for a story or if he felt that it was more therapeutic for her to tell her story into the tapes.
Oh, that makes more sense. Maybe it was like a therapy session.
Right.
Okay.
And he was trying to have her just recount things so that it would make her feel better.
There you go. So you start getting into the tapes, and it talks about how when she was a very young girl, and it's all, I believe from the drawing, she's like in her crib, like her little stroller. Her mother is a single parent, and this guy or this other woman's like, hey, I know this place where you can like live rent free. You don't have to pay for anything. Everything's provided to you. So the women, Anka, go there and come to find out it's a brothel. And the mother becomes very cold-hearted towards Anka. And when Anka's like a toddler, the mother will taunt her with like treats, and she'll go to get the treat, and then she just like hits the child, burns cigarettes.
Burns cigarettes in her arm.
So Anka finds refuge in the house kitchen cook, the house cook. And the cook is the one who shows her the garden that she has and teaches her how to hide in the garden to not get hurt by her mom.
Mm-hmm. And tells her, stay away from your mom.
Yeah. Like, and come to me. And so throughout the years, they develop a very close relationship, and Anka learns how to take care of all the flowers. And she wants to help with deliveries when she gets older. And the kitchen cook, I'm so sorry, I can't remember her name. She's like...
There's a lot of names, but I forget them.
You can never deliver to this one guy. So, one day, the cook goes out of town for the weekend, and the madam of the brothel is like, hey, I need you to make this delivery. And she's like, I'm not really supposed to, but she decides to go ahead and do it because she's being told she has to. Her mother kind of makes her. So she's tempted to just leave the carrots, because the carrots were very difficult to get back then, apparently, at the kitchen door.
This is World War II. Or
before.
Right before World War II, right.
So she goes and delivers the carrots, and the guy says, I paid for more than carrots. Then it flashes forward. Karen's in bed. The cook is taking care of her because she's back now.
Anka's in bed.
Yeah, sorry. Anka's in bed. Did I say Karen?
Yeah.
Oh, my bad.
Well, it goes back and forth.
Yeah, this is all like, which is beautifully done. But come to find out, the mom sold her daughter Anka to the brothel owner, and she sent her like the guy who got the carrots like paid for her. So the kitchen cook is like furious, but she can't really do anything. Then one day the mom's washing her hair, and all of her hair falls out, and there's speculation that the cook
poisoned her, essentially.
Yeah, with all the stuff. So somehow the cook ends up disappearing. Like, she's never seen from again.
it's a little more disturbing than that.
Yeah.
The cook wants to basically take Anka with her and flee the brothel.
Oh, that's right.
So she has, I think, Anka hide in this like costume area, and then she doesn't come back for her. She's not sure what's going on. They were supposed to just like leave that morning or something, and so Anka puts on the mask and a costume, thinking as a child would that no one would recognize her, and so she wanders looking for the cook and finds the cook in the garden, I believe, bludgeoned to death, and so clearly someone got wind of what was happening and they basically killed the cook.
Or they figured she was you poisoned one of our money makers,
Right,
so
yeah.
now you're gonna die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So either way, yeah, the Anka ended up being trapped in the brothel.
And then, how does she get to the other place? The guy. This is
The
where-
pharmacy?
Yeah,
I
how
think
does she
there
get to
might have been a
pharmacy?
deal.
Yeah. So eventually, she leaves the brothel and she goes to this other place, and it's all these little girls, and this little girl is gonna like train her, and they just hang out all day and they play games.
It looks like a school,
Yeah, like a school for girls.
but there's something just off about it. The way the girls seem, she assumed she was going there to be kind of an assistant to help
That's right.
administer medicine and such, and that's kind of what was told to her.
Yeah, because she's gonna work at the pharmacy, and it's
Right.
very important.
Right,
You're
and so
gonna
she thought
heal
this is kind of
people.
cool, and but so there was just something off to her about the girls who were there. So.
So at night, she goes to bed, and the other little girl jumps in and starts masturbating her. She's like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" And she's like, "Well, you need to know what it's like so you can fake it." And she's like, "I'm training you," and that's how it comes
man.
out that the guy who owns the place is a physician, but people will call and they'll say if they want a red pill, a gold
Right.
pill, a black pill. That's the hair color.
Right.
And he'll say, how many do you want? They have to give a number between 12 and 16. That's the age.
Mm-hmm.
And the girls are shipped out, and then they're come back. And Anka has her first client, and she's really worried about healing the patient. She's not sure. And so she goes to this man's house.
He's pretty wealthy.
Yeah, and like the maid kind of looks at her funny, and all he does is he just spanks her.
Mm-hmm.
And she does something, I forget what she does, but she did something to like act like it hurt or something to like help get him off. Like
I was a little unclear exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but at this point you start to realize that she's very observant and she knows how to read people, and she's doing what she can to survive. And this becomes important later on. That's why I'm going into this, not just to but they ended up forming like a bond throughout the years.
The rich man and her.
Yeah. So at one point, she comes back, and then a few days later, she goes back to like the pharmacy, and her friend like is crying, and she goes and lays in bed with her. She's like, I think I cured him. I don't know. I hope so. And when she wakes up, like she's covered in blood, and
Right.
she's like dead. And
The little girl's dead.
yeah,
Anka's
well,
friend?
she dies. Like she ends up dying, and then Anka ends up going to this one place, and you can tell it's the same place that her friend went. And there's all these people in masks.
Right. So they basically, the pharmacy owner says he wants her to help her friend. So the friend isn't dead yet, as far as Anka knows, and she's gone to this special place to be taken care of by nuns, is what the pharmacy guy says. So
Yeah,
Like an
nuns.
eyes wide shut party.
Yeah, kind
Kinda.
of.
Oh,
That's
kinda.
yeah.
So then, so he takes this is like a special job for Anka. She desperately wants to be with her friend and see her get well. So they ship her off, and it's super creepy. And yeah, there's people in robes and masks, and they lay her down, and it seems like they're gonna do like some kind of whack ass like ritual killing.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow the face of the cook like comes to her like in a vision, and I'm a little unclear exactly what happens, but somehow maybe she assaults one of the people who
Well, someone poisoned the wine. You find out later.
oh
So they drink this wine, and somebody
The party goers do.
Yeah, somebody poisoned it. But you're right. She does see his face, and the
cook's
face is like telling her to like run, and I think she like kicks somebody.
yeah
and they all start like heaving over, so she is able to run.
Okay, that makes it a little more clear
Yeah.
how she was able to incapacitate all those adults. But yeah, it was like
like one screenshot, and it's easy to miss. Like,
Right.
and I forget who, but someone poisoned the wine because
Right.
they were tired of those guys hurting
Right.
the girls.
right.
Oh, so somebody knew about this pervert party going on.
Well, it was even hard to say this, even more disturbing. I think they were actually sacrificing them like in a satanic, supernatural ritual kind of thing. So
Those Nazis were into some crazy shit.
Yeah.
So she ends up running, and doesn't she find her way back to the older man, the rich man? Is that what happens?
Yes, and the rich, they're hesitant to take her because they know this powerful group, and they'll know that, she went there, but he does. And so he ends up kind of saving her, and they develop this very close relationship, and he eventually pays for her to go to school to make something of her life.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually kind of loves this guy, but like he tells her, I'm not attracted to you.
You're too old for me.
Yeah, because she's like 16 now. She has boobs. She's
Still, like,
No,
Yeah.
I mean, believe me, this guy is no saint.
yeah, he's
but
not,
he's rescued her, and he's
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
a twisted way kind to her,
Yeah.
because she's not as abused as she was at the pharmacy, and it's almost unclear if he makes her do much of anything.
Yeah, I never got the impression that he actually penetrated her. And he is going to play another important role later on in the story.
Right.
So
And he's apparently, just as a hint, he's very powerful and rich. So yeah, exactly. So it plays a bigger part later on.
and this is in Germany, correct?
Correct.
yeah.
Yeah.
And this is it's before World War II. So
Mhm.
so then like the tape cuts off, and then it flashes back more. It comes back to Karen's time. And at this point of the book, so I read this in 4 hours, but it's broken up over 2 days. This is when I got like really drawn into the book. I was like, dang it, now I have to finish. Like now I really want to know what happens to Anka. I want to know what happens to Karen. Like now I'm
And-
like really pulled in.
And was this a suicide or a murder
Right.
for Anka's death?
Karen ends up getting two friends at school. One is named, I just forgot her name. Not Missy, but there's another girl.
She's very sickly. I forgot her name as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's clear
She's
that
kind
she
of an
comes
oddball too.
Yeah, and it's clear she comes from not a good home.
Yeah.
And in
she's,
some
like,
ways they
starved.
represent different monsters. So
Oh,
Karen
yeah.
is the wolf man. This girl is either a ghost or a zombie. And then the other friend is a young black boy, and he for some reason has scars. So Karen,
He was attacked by a dog.
He's
Oh,
like Frankenstein.
so yeah, so she draws him as Frankenstein.
Yeah,
so the
that's
three
right.
of them are basically classic movie monsters.
The Universal trio.
Right.
So they they become friends because Karen does this like really morbid Valentine's, and nobody gets it except for the black guy. And somehow Karen gets after school detention, and she's with the other girl, and the other girl's like, hey, come to my birthday party, like I want to be friends. So these three kind of become friends, and I think I'm fast forwarding a bit. I might be fast forwarding too much, but
That's fine.
so Karen still gets picked on at school. And come to find out, the reason.
Oh, just real quick. So
Yeah.
the boy's name is Franklin, of course, like
thank you.
Frankenstein.
Yeah. Duh. Wow. So Franklin, and he ends up liking Karen as a friend because she's never laughed at him. That was like a big thing. Like he's very quiet. He sticks to himself. But so Karen keeps getting taunted at school. We should talk about D's soon too, but we haven't. And Mom has a issue too. But
Right.
I'm jumping way ahead. But this book is so big. That's okay.
It's
I think.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One day, the boys start like really kind of bullying her, and all of a sudden they shove her to the ground, and the lead bully's like, okay, spread her legs apart. And the other little boy's like, you don't want to put your thing in her. And he's like, I'm going to teach her a lesson. And like, it really is like they're about to rape her. And
And then she assumed that it would be a typical bullying session.
Yeah,
where
like
they
just-
pick on her, call her name, spit on her, but then suddenly she realizes it's going to be taken to a totally different level.
yeah, and she's kind of helpless at this point. But Franklin intervenes, and he kind of helps her, and that's how they become friends. But what's funny is like they beat up the boys, and then she's worried she's going to get in trouble from the nuns. The nuns are going to really punish her. So they all ditch that day and they go to the museum for refuge. And
Sandy's the other girl's name.
Thank you, Sandy. Yeah. So she's worried at first, like, if her friends will even like the museum, and they love it. Like, and this part, to be honest, I kind of skimmed over because this is like little parts like this I didn't really care so much because I wanted to get back to Anka. I want to get back to the murder. So her brother Diaz is a tattoo artist, I think.
Yeah, I think
or he
so.
does tattoos.
Well, he's an illustrator.
He's an illustrator.
And then I think he tats himself.
Oh, okay.
Well, and the thing is that his because he's an illustrator, his fingers are always basically soaked in ink. So that's what they call little tattoos. She calls it little tattoos when he touches things.
The mom does.
Yeah.
She calls them his spiders and his bats.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, right, so they smear on other things like skin. They're not permanent. It's just it happens to be where he touches.
Yeah. So he's kind of the monarch of the family. He's trying to hold things together. Mama is getting sicker and sicker.
Well, at first you don't know that she's sick. It's later revealed that she is ill.
With breast cancer.
Right. And, she's getting sick, and he's kind of... At the beginning of the story, he's more of a typical, I don't know what you call it, 60s, 70s gigolo kind of guy.
Yeah.
You know, he's just banging anyone left and right. I mean, in fact, sometimes Karen catches him banging someone. And I think, looking back now at the book, I think she actually catches him
with Anka, right?
With Anka.
Yeah, and she kind of blurred that memory, but then she realized what she...
Which is, once again, great on how it's told, written-wise, word-wise, and illustrated, where I love her perspective as a 10-year-old kid and how she processes.
Well, and Anka's always portrayed as blue.
Right.
And when she first catches them having sex, Anka and her brother, she's not blue. She's just the background page color because there's not. And that's my dogs fighting in the background.
That's Johnny's stomach.
Right.
Well, that's right. That's a good thing too, because her memory is she caught Diaz with a woman in bed, and the woman kind of hid her face. And later on, she realizes it was Anka, but she didn't want to admit that it was Anka because Anka was like more than twice his age, and he was only 16 at the time. And this is someone who she really admired. So, Diaz is trying to like hold the family together. He and Mama aren't really telling Karen what's going on, and this is like making Karen kind of investigate further. She ends up stealing the tape recorder out of S's house when he like passes out, and she goes back and listens to it later. And so it kind of finishes off Anka's story. She goes to school. She gets a job in a factory at night, and then one day
Anka does?
Yep.
Okay.
And she's older now.
Yeah, and one day at the factory, they're like, "You can't work here anymore. We're not allowed to hire Jews." And she's like, "Oh, okay." So
she has to get proper identification, which includes sewing a yellow star on her clothes.
Well, and this is the most disturbing part of this. So she goes to register, and the guy's like, "Oh, here's your 2 stars." He's like, "You're really lucky. Some people have to make their own." And she's like, "Oh, thank you."
Right.
Like,
no.
yeah.
No, she doesn't suspect anything.
Yeah, nobody did at that time.
They're
well,
just...
the horror of what is happening is crazy because they're put on the train. They're taken to a town. Up to this point, a lot of people just feel inconvenienced. No one's scared.
Yeah.
As they're walking through the town, they go, "Oh, look, there's a bookshop. Surely nothing bad can happen to us. There's a bakery, everything." And then Anka looks into the bakery itself, and that's when she realizes the true horror of what's happening, because the bakery, she sees a rat go across some cakes, and she knocks on the window, and she realizes the worker she sees there is just a mannequin. So the town isn't real. It's basically there as a facade to kind of make people
placate people.
Right,
yeah.
exactly. And so they're slowly, basically, I mean, there's talks of, I think, chambers or something like that.
Yeah, and at this point, she has befriended this little boy on the train because he can't find his mom, so she's still kind of like holding on to him, and they get separated, and they start like separating people out, and she goes to a guard with the notes, and she's like...
Right, if we didn't say this beforehand, her rich benefactor had given her a note with his name and everything, basically to guarantee her safe passage and I think access to a good school.
Yeah, but I wasn't aware of that note until this point.
Oh.
So yeah, like I didn't even know that but yeah, so she hands the note to the guard or whatever, and he takes her to another room, and yeah, so there she meets this guy who used to be part of the brothel, or his sister worked at the brothel, but he's transgender. He looks like a woman, so.
And he's wearing a pink triangle.
On his like black and white area. So the guard arranges a phone call for her benefactor, and he's like,
you're in a very dangerous place. He knows exactly what's happening. He's in the know, and tells her that she has to escape.
And Anka, being who she is, she's like, I want to bring people with me, and he's like, absolutely not. She's like, there's all these kids here, and she's like, what if I start a pharmacy?
Right.
So they start talking on the phone, and she's allowed to bring 6, and she really wants to bring the little boy that she befriended, and he won't let her because he's like, what will people think of me? So right now it's okay that he has a pharmacy and he's selling girls for sex, but it's not, to have a boy. But so it kind of leaves there.
Oh, I thought you meant the kid said this. So the benefactor said
on the phone. It's
no, Anka says it. Anka says, "What if I start a pharmacy?"
Right.
So
no, but the
benefactor. Yes,
the benefactor
is
the one that's like no boys.
Yeah, and she's like, "Well, I need a messenger boy." He's like, "No." So she ends up getting the guy from the brothel, and then it kind of ends. It doesn't say what other 5 she gets.
The guy with the pink triangle.
Yeah.
She takes him.
Well, yeah, he doesn't want to go, but she makes him go.
Right.
And then that kind of ends with Anka's story. But I thought this reminded me of the movie Sophie's Choice. So Anka is now doing what the benefactor did to her. She's going to put these people in a life of sexual slavery, but she's saving their life. Like, to her,
it's the lesser of two evils.
Right, because she knows if they stay here, it's immediate death.
Maybe they could somehow at least buy them time so they can escape properly.
I thought you were going to say she was going to, when you were leading up to that point, I was like, oh no, she's going to create a Joy Division here with kids. That's what they called that's where the band name comes from. Joy Division was the Jewish women that were forced to be sexual slaves to the Nazis.
Oh.
It was called the Joy Division.
Oh, well, I don't know if this is any better,
So,
but yeah, he does tell her, he's like, I'm already paying a fortune for you. He's like, you can bring 6. So that ends. You don't know any more about Anka. And then I was like, like, what happened? So then it goes back to Karen, and her and Missy are kind of sort of becoming friends again, but it's top secret. And then
so I mean, Missy invites her to a birthday party. She's worried it's essentially going to become a trap. In many ways, like the movie Carrie kind of thing, all those predates Carrie, where they would invite her, pretend to be nice, and then have a bunch of laughs on her benefit. But she didn't care. She knowing this, she goes in there just so she can have at least a few minutes with Missy, and they can somehow be together. And true enough, actually, Missy has no ill intentions, and she really misses Karen a lot. And then at some point, she escorts Karen out the back stairwell, using the excuse that she didn't want Karen to be seen by other neighbors, which her mom agreed was a good idea. And I guess
Missy's mom said that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they don't kiss, right?
They don't, but she illustrates herself as like the big monster, and Missy is the princess,
right?
And she does kiss her, and I don't think they actually do kiss,
right?
But so after the party, Diaz is walking her home, and they kind of get in this argument, and Karen says I'm like you. Oh, Diaz is like, hey, I found your journal. And he makes her look in a window. He's like, look, you're not a monster. You're a little girl. And she says, I'm just like you. I'm just like you. I like girls. And then Diaz is like, oh, God.
Well, no, I was going to say just before that, Diaz feels like he has to have the big talk with her. I think he suspects something happened at school with the boys trying to basically do something to her. And, being also the gigolo, he knows how boys think. So he's trying to be proactive and go, look,
oh, that makes more sense. Like, you're a girl.
You're a girl. Things are going to happen, blah, blah, blah. And then she basically blurts out that
I like girls.
I like girls. And he's shocked. But then he acts in a totally acceptable way. And it's awesome how he basically accepts her. He tells her to keep it secret because he understands how the world at that time will react to her. But he's completely cool with it, which is, I thought he was going to flip out or something, but he was great about it.
And then Karen also overhears Dee's talk one night that mom's dying, the breast cancer is not getting better, and that their father, who's been out of the picture this whole time. Oh, that's why the kids pick on her, because she doesn't have a dad. I remember now, like, but he tells her, like, everyone has a dad. Like, come to find out, the dad is threatening to take Karen back if he doesn't get insurance money, but there is no insurance money. And Diaz is like, after what he did to her, like, he'll never see her again. And
he's really afraid to leave Karen with him, which makes me suspect that this dad is a big creep, too.
Right. And then, so spoiler, sorry, the mom dies. I'm rushing through a lot right now just to get to the end.
Right.
Sorry,
well, and that was a really emotional moment because they climb in the bed with the mom, and she's looks horrible, nothing like the vibrant woman she was, and they hold her hand, and then she passes away. Yeah, and then when they're at her service, someone says, "Oh, I think it's the thug's wife." He's like, "Oh, isn't that?" There's like a little girl, like in what is that called? The stand-up burial sites or something? Mausoleum.
Thank you. I'm a mausoleum. And she's like, "Oh, isn't that them?" And throughout this time, Karen has kind of discovered, but nobody will talk about it, she has a brother named Victor. So she thinks they're talking about Victor, and then he goes, "Yeah, that's Julie. We don't want to talk about it." And so now she has a sister who died. And there was some time right before this too that it was almost implied that Diaz has hurt somebody in the family, because the women are talking at the funeral, and it's like, well, can you imagine being a mom and having to love someone who hurt someone? And Karen confronts Dees, and he basically says, "You wouldn't look at me the same way if you knew." Yeah. So, and then at the funeral scene, it's done. Book is done. You don't know who Julia is. Right. You don't know what happens to Anka in her pharmacy. You don't know who the killer is.
So it's still undetermined.
Yes. So
who shot Anka?
Yeah. So volume 2 comes out in April of 2018.
Right, next year.
So
next year.
This book was so compelling that I started Googling because I needed like answers at 6:30 in the morning, and I didn't get my answers, and so I was like, who's gonna pay $40 for a comic book? And I'm like, I gotta go buy this comic book, and then I gotta go buy volume 2. It's so beautifully done, and it did remind me of Mr. Punch, and that how memories are not always concrete, and it's not a direct reflection of the past. And I just thought it was very beautiful. This little girl, because we've all been there as kids, like, you're not getting all the information, and you're trying to get the information,
or things come in and they're too big for your little kid brain to process, and then you'll be doing something else and you're like 22 and you're like, or you'll have an experience and you'll be like, oh shit, that's why my parents did that, or that's why they were talking about that. Now I realize this is what they were talking about.
Right. I can't give concrete examples, but there are examples where the language she uses, she's clearly trying to use a bigger word, but as a kid she hears it as like maybe two separate weird words. Yeah. And like you said, Francis, much like Mr. Punch, it's great to see how the adult world is filtered through an actual mind of a little kid, and how a kid would process it visually, how because of her interest in monsters, she processes it through that filter. It's fascinating. Like I said before, like even when she's talking about walking through the streets of Chicago, sometimes she would see some of the prostitutes just having sex
in cars
and stuff. But she had a really interesting way of some kind of the gears of the night. I don't know. She had this weird
the night gears.
Were going, and it was just, that's how a kid thinks. They come up with this like little way of processing it.
So there was a thing where she kept trying to get into the basement of their building.
She never gets in.
Never gets in the basement.
It's locked up. And this is, I know we kind of have went long on time. We just touched the surface of this book. There's so much more detail and intricacy.
Pick this book up.
And so another thing I want to touch on too, just really quickly, what I thought the author did so well. We just came off the Preacher series and Luther Stroud, and there's all these violent scenes, and there's all these like gore implications, and there's like all this. There was like
just carnage and
nothing made me so ill as when the doctor was on the phone talking about the pills, and I realized the little girls were it was a sex trade, and I just like my heart sunk. And what Anka had to go through, real or unreal. I mean, there are kids that do, unfortunately, with sex trafficking and everything. Like, it's so powerful. Like, just with how little was said. Like, and this has had the biggest impact on me than any of the other comics that
and
we
the
read.
Knowledge that we have as, you know, living in the, you know, their future, we know what's descending upon Germany at that time. And you're just like, fuck. Even, I mean, she could only get 6 people out, and who knows what happened to them after that. You know, we'll find out, but it's just terrifying.
I share all the same accolades that Francis and Johnny are pouring on the book, but I also want to emphasize how amazing that the author, Emil Ferris, did on this book, because if you look at what she went through, she actually, at the age of, I think it was 40, 41, contracted West Nile virus, and she became paralyzed from the waist down, lost the ability to use her drawing hand, her right hand, and it was during her, I think it was like a 6-year rehabilitation, she did this book.
Oh,
so
really?
This is a testament that, you know, a lot of people talk about, you know, you got to be a star now on YouTube, and you got to be young, and you got to, you know, once you're in your 40s, you got to have an already established career. This is a testament where you can find fame and your inspiration later on in life. And even if you have something as crippling as losing the ability to walk, which she's eventually, I guess, regained motor function, full motor function. But even when but she had to reteach herself to draw.
Yeah, her daughter taped her pen to her hand, and it took her 6 hours to do like a self-portrait or something. Yeah, and it's beautiful.
So,
like, it's amazing.
And if you look at the artwork in here, it is stunning. I mean, just amazing.
And and I went to her site because again, I was like so desperate for more. Her current work, like not related to this book, is still intricate but so beautifully done, and you can tell that in this book it's deliberately to look like a 10-year-old drew it. Like and it was so great. And another thing too, I don't know if she's a lesbian in real life. I think maybe, I don't know. Well, she has a daughter. Well, you can still be a lesbian and have a daughter. I don't know, but it made me think too, going back to what you said about the time period, homosexuality and LGBT, like I don't even think about it today. Like, it's not a big deal, but I forget the fight that they had to fight, and people had to hide this. And even as early in the 60s, I was like, oh, that is like, that's like a big deal. Like, and I take that for granted
and
now.
the racism, we glazed over some of
there's tons of racism in this.
They couldn't even actually get the mom buried in the cemetery. It wasn't until, funny enough, the mobster's wife said, you know what, if you don't bury the mom here, you're going to be buried, essentially.
Well, and the night of the murder of Anka, or murder, suicide, whatever it is, of Anka, when Karen and her mom were waiting in this diner near the house, DZ is outside being questioned by the police, and when he comes in, this gnarled old lady sitting at the counter. She's like, "What are you spics doing in here?"
Right.
Like, basically, and he tells her to basically fuck off and get out of his face. But and you know, and that was the other thing, was during this time was when a lot of Brown and Black pride was starting to come up, and he had a very Chicano look, and it was like embracing his brown pride. So I don't know. Yeah, it was an amazing book. I will be finishing it.
Yeah, the atmosphere in the book, the drawings. It was $40. If you want, you can get it on Comixology for about half that price. If you do their, I don't want to plug them, but if you do their little free unlimited thing, it's included in it.
Go buy it from your comic book store.
Or buy it from your comic book store.
Oh, this is a good point. No, screw that. Listen to this. This made me mad. I called 4 comic book stores to see if they had the book, and I said my favorite thing is monsters. They're like, oh, the Marvel book? I was like, not every book is Marvel, people. No, not the Marvel book. So I'm surprised, like, even in the comic book world, I have seen this at Barnes & Noble. Like, it hasn't, in other bookstores, this hasn't really picked up.
Well, think about it. This author has no history with
it's her
comic
first.
books.
Yeah.
It's an expensive book.
She did win an award, though. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is expensive. And
But
it's
this
thick.
is-
You could be scared off easily.
But this is the reason why, honestly, I wanted to start a book club, why we started the podcast, or to find these kind of gems out there, these kind of books that, well, it's not like we discovered this, but maybe not recognized by some comic book fans.
How did you? Sorry, to cut you
NPR
off.
story.
Is that how? Okay, I was
Yeah.
gonna ask, like, how did you find out about this thing?
And
Well, I've seen it a lot, and I've just
Oh,
never-
really?
Yeah, like even in Colorado, it's in my picture.
yeah, like I said, at first glance, I wasn't sure what to make of it. I thought maybe it would actually be a bust because there wouldn't be many words. Turns out it's really dense.
Yeah, it's dense on everything: pictures, writing, metaphor.
But that should be
There's-
commended. It's
Like,
not.
Yeah.
One of my favorite. Yeah, I don't mean that as a negative. One of my favorite things in here is when she goes to she eats a pot brownie, not realizing what it is. She eats a pot brownie. This hippie tells her it's just a magical brownie.
Right.
So she eats it, gets a little stoned because she eats the whole thing. Well, I shouldn't say little. She gets really stoned, goes into a cemetery, and it must be her sister's mausoleum. But she's talking to all these spirits, and then they point her to one of them, and at the name on the tombstone or the mausoleum says MacGuffin. And I was like, oh, like that's pretty funny that they put that in there. And I had I finished reading this, I was like, does that come back somehow on the mausoleum play into this somehow? But I won't know because I didn't finish reading it.
Well, and there's still volume 2. So
Yeah.
definitely pick up this book and check out volume 2 next year, which I'm sure we'll be covering.
Yeah.
No, I'm good.
Johnny, where can people find you? Not reading.
Yeah, half-assing things, which is why my life is the way it is. No, you can find me on Twitter at Serious Talk Twit. What about you, Francis?
You can find me on Instagram at Words and Waffles.
And you can follow the podcast Twitter at GN Explorers Club. Also, we have an Instagram at GN Explorers Club. And you can email us, gnexplorersclub at gmail.com.
What's the name of the show, people?
And it's called Graphic Novel Explorers Club. Or if you want to shorten it, GN Explorers Club.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
We'll see you next episode.
Bye.
Bye now. Bye-bye.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode of Graphic Novel Explorers Club. Tune in for next week's episode of Too Much Coffee Man by Shannon Wheeler. Guantanamera.
It is too early in the morning for us.
Guantanamera.